Good afternoon. My name is Tanvir Ahmed. I'm a program manager on the Windows Autopilot team. And this session is going to be about what's new with Windows Autopilot, Part 2. Many of you have seen or attended Michael Niehause's session yesterday, talking about some of the new capabilities that we've been rolling out and working hard on for 1809. Today, what I'd like to talk about is the rest of the scenarios we didn't cover yesterday. We'll start off by just doing a quick recap of what it is that we're trying to do with Windows Autopilot. If you think about the traditional way of deploying Windows machines, it's pretty much this standard cookie-cutter approach. You build a custom image, you deploy that image to a new computer, and you spend a lot of time and money, which kind of makes this a very expensive proposition. And I know that we've gone over this many times, but it really helps to understand where we're coming from as a team when we come out with new scenarios to help and modernize this existing process. When we think about Autopilot, we're really envisioning devices where you simply unbox the machine just off the shelf and you boot it. And once it's booted, the device deploys itself or guides you through a seamless user experience where the user can intuitively deploy the device. It cuts out a lot of the effort that's needed for things like imaging, and it helps make this a feature that helps reduce your overall bottom line. Autopilot's really framed from the beginning of a device's life cycle all the way to the end. So when we work on Autopilot, we're not just stuck to the beginning couple of screens in Ubi. We're really working hard with all of our OEM partners and resellers to make sure that there's a seamless experience for IT admins to go ahead and procure these devices from them such that they're already registered into Autopilot. From there, obviously, our product team in Redmond and around the world focuses very hard on making sure that once you turn on that Windows machine for the first time in the hands of the actual end user, that it gets to a business-ready state as fast as possible. When you're done deploying, there's an ongoing management of that device, and we rely on our MDM partners to help us do that. And we'll talk more about how that value is added when you add management and some of the things that you get with enrolling just with Microsoft Intune as well. And at the end of the overall life cycle, you have either a retirement of the device when it's going out of your organization. We can talk a little bit about that. And also scenarios where we talked about yesterday with Autopilot Reset, where if devices stop working at some point throughout its life cycle, you can quickly and easily reset the device so that it goes back to a business-ready state. Autopilot is really about not only having a great IT admin experience for how they're procuring and delivering devices to end users, but also a delightful experience for our end users where you get to experience the joy of actually opening a new device for the first time, getting that new computer smell, taking the shrink wrap off yourselves. A lot of you have seen either myself or members from my team in various customer visits. You'll know that we talk about the infamous Cheetos dust on your computers that IT admins leave behind when they're setting up your machines for the first time. Today, what I'd like to do is, starting from here, take time and talk about 3 new scenarios that we're delivering in 1809. And in each of these scenarios, I'd like you to join me and help understand why we're developing the things we're developing, what we're hearing from customers, go through the experiences themselves, and then at the end, what I'll do is I'll recap each of the features. Now, it'd be great from this audience, when I reach the recap slide and I summarize everything about the feature, let me know with applause or whatever it is, whether you appreciate the feature. And at the end, we'll figure out which scenario was the crowd favorite. And we'll start out by talking about Autopilot support for AAD. Now, yesterday we focused a lot around what exists today, specifically how you get devices registered into Autopilot, how you set up deployment profiles, and how that end user experience looks like. We announced several new features around device naming capabilities, added support for BitLocker, and scenarios like forced enrollment, which allow you to prevent users from choosing a different tenant when they're going ahead and deploying devices. But actually, if I only have 3 scenarios that I'd like to highlight, I'm not really going to spend it talking about AAD here. What we'd really rather be talking about is the one customers are asking us for, which is hybrid AAD join. And so before we really get into it, I'd like to level set the playing field here. And first, just talk about what is it that we mean when we talk about hybrid AAD join. A number of you came up to me in the expo hall and asked me, is there support for Autopilot for on-prem AD? And when I mentioned that we'll have some announcement around hybrid, you looked at me and said, well, I asked about on-prem, not really hybrid. And so I'd like to spend a moment before we get into this just talking about what is it that we mean when we talk about hybrid Azure AD join. We're talking about when devices are actually joined to your on-prem AD and also registered into AAD. When you get this state where a device is registered in both your on-prem AD and AAD, you enter this hybrid AAD join scenario that we referred to. The interesting thing is that if you've deployed AAD Connect and you use Windows 10 1607 or later, you likely already use this. There's already code in Windows which automatically registers your on-prem AAD join devices into AAD if you've deployed AAD Connect. And if these terms aren't confusing enough, I'll throw one more in there. Some of you also refer to this as DJ++. You can find out more in that link below, and these slides will be shared after. But that's roughly what we're talking about. So yes, when I talk about hybrid Azure AD join, I am talking about being able to join your devices to on-prem AD. And to think about what kind of challenge this really is for us, when we're thinking about a design and we're thinking about how to go about solving this type of problem, the things we have to solve is, well, first of all, we have to respond to customer feedback where they're routinely asking us to be able to join on-prem domains via UBI, which is not possible today without Autopilot if you're going through vanilla UBI, which is why a number of you choose to provide images or use unattend or something of that sort to join devices to your on-prem domains. The other piece is really coming from our team and some customer requests as well, but it's really around, there's an expectation of what it means to have an Autopilot device. There's some level of expectation that you'll be able to do things that you already are comfortable with the user-driven mode. Things like being able to auto-accept the Windows EULA, skip privacy pages, now that we've announced it, rename devices through Autopilot, and then choose whether that first user is admin or standard. And when we design this, we keep our Autopilot principles in mind as well. It really should be as easy as registering your device into Autopilot, assigning a profile, and then booting your device for the first time. If it kind of goes beyond these 3 steps, it's not really worth doing it in an Autopilot way. It's not really making it easier for the end user, and that's what we're really trying to do here. I'll take a moment here and switch into the specifics of how hybrid AAD join works. Some context before we go into that revolves around these things we call ODJ blobs. So let's talk about ODJ blobs, and what do I mean when I say an ODJ blob? Well, ODJ blobs stand for Offline Domain Join Blob. And this blob is really at the center of the hybrid Autopilot flow. This is not a new technology that's around. This is not a new technology. It's a technology that's been around for quite some time. In fact, if you have a device that's joined to a domain already, you can generate your own blob from any domain joined device. As long as you have rights to join that domain, you can also run it from the server. And the command is right here. So if you were to do, djoin and you save the file as an output, what this actually does is it creates this blob that we keep talking about, an ODJ blob. And the best way to really think about this is imagine this ODJ blob stores the credentials needed for any given machine to join your domain. So if we take that and take a step back, here are the pieces that are involved with joining a brand new device into your on-prem domain for the first time. When an employee or an end user unboxes a device for the first time and connects that device to the internet, the first thing that device will do is it will send up its hardware ID to the Autopilot service. This isn't necessarily unique to hybrid AAD join. This happens for all Windows devices, starting with 1703 with the July update. The Autopilot service will reply back with an Autopilot profile. The new piece here is that it's going to specify hybrid AAD join instead of the typical user-driven mode that's been available up until now. The device will then enroll against Intune, and Intune will then use this new connector called the offline domain join connector to reach back to your on-premises AD. The output of that communication is going to be Intune pushing down an offline domain join blob to your device. Once that ODJ is on your machine, if you recall, that ODJ contains the credentials needed for any arbitrary device to join your on-premise domain. So what happens is once Intune pushes down this ODJ blob, your device is now able to talk to your AD domain controller. And from your DC, you'll be able to get GPOs over CorpNet. I'd like to spend one extra moment talking about this specific section here and talk about what's really going on when I say that there's a new offline domain join connector between Intune and your on-prem DC. The ODJ connector, in a nutshell, allows Intune to generate machine objects on your on-premise DC on your behalf. So that script we talked about a couple of slides ago, Intune will automatically generate one of those blobs on your behalf dynamically as and when new devices come onto your network through Autopilot. When Intune sends a request to your domain controller, a new computer record with the machine name foo in this case will be created in your DC. That output would be a ODJ blob, which is then piped back to Intune, which it will then deliver to your end machine. So let's take a quick look at how this works, or what this experience looks like. As you see, I'm in the Intune portal, and I'm on the UI where you go ahead and create deployment profiles. So in this deployment profile creation page, if you go and create a new profile, one of the options you'll get when you go into user-driven mode is really in the second drop-down here. You'll see two options show up within, well, shortly after Ignite. One option will be join Azure AD, and the next option will be hybrid Azure AD joined. If you select hybrid Azure AD joined, that's really all you need to set up this entire process. Well, this and also installing that offline domain join connector on your DC. And when you boot a machine that has this profile assigned to it for the first time, you'll get an experience that looks like this. Now, here you'll see a video of a device that's booting up for the first time. It's currently connected via Ethernet to a network that has line of sight to my DC. I'll sign in with my AAD credentials that are tied to my tenant. If I have multi-factor authentication set up on my AAD tenant, I would have been prompted to set up or to do multi-factor auth here. What will happen on the device is now instead of doing the typical AAD join process, it's going to skip joining the device into AAD, and instead use AAD Premium's auto-enrollment feature to enroll that device into Intune. Intune will then process an offline domain join request, and an ODJ blob will come down to this machine. In a moment, you'll see the ODJ blob come down, and the device will give a message saying that it will continue after this reboot. This reboot is needed because the device name is being updated to match what was created on your behalf on the DC. So we'll see the device reboot, and when it comes up again, the device is now renamed to match the computer object that's on your DC, and what you'll see is the same autopilot experiences that we've delivered with user-driven mode. So you'll see the enrollment status page, and all of your configurations will come down during that step, and you land on the login page. So here you sign in with any domain credential from your on-prem AD, and you'll be able to log in. So I know what you're thinking. You know, you're showing a video, which means this takes forever to do. And the reality of this is, I've only condensed this a little bit. This took 4 minutes when I recorded this on Friday. And depending on your configurations, it will vary beyond that, but it can be as low as 4 minutes. If we go into settings and look into the accounts page, you'll see that this device is actually joined to a domain. And if you were really careful, you would have checked the timestamps, and you'll notice it's not too far off. And you'll see the device is not only joined to your on-prem domain, but is also MDM enrolled, as indicated by the info button, which would have given you the details on your MDM enrollment. The nice thing about this is if your domain automatically pushes down the SCCM agent, or if Intune pushes down the SCCM agent, your device is already not only hybrid Azure AD joined, it's also co-managed. So your device just fits in with the rest of the devices in your estate, although this device was deployed using a modern method, which is going to save you a ton of money. Now, this project is one that we've been working on for quite some time. And honestly, it'd be difficult to get to this point without having a lot of help from a number of our customers. One customer I'd like to highlight here is the Royal Bank of Canada. And they've really helped us validate this flow, design ideas, and really get to this point today. And what I'd like to do is invite on stage Hasnain Walaji from the Royal Bank of Canada to share some words on this amazing partnership. So give it up for Hasnain.
Thank you, So thank you very much, everybody, for giving me the opportunity to come up here and talk to you a little bit about what I would like to refer to as our partnership with Microsoft, because that's exactly what it was. It was a partnership. Quick slide with, they somehow took the picture today, because obviously I'm, in the same clothes. Not only that, a quick bio of mine, not so important. What's more important is the wonderful organization for which I work, the Royal Bank of Canada. I'm going to leave it on this slide because you know what? Death by PowerPoint is never fun. But what I do want to do is take an opportunity to talk to you about how a financial industry is having a lot of old processes, the way we do things in the past with images, drivers. I mean, a lot of you guys know what happens when one of our executives come to us and say, hey guys, you know what, I was at this convention, I went out to the show and there's this really new cool piece of hardware. Can you put the image on it? I'd like to try it out. By the end of the day, please, if you don't mind. And we all go, oh, sure, sir. But what happens behind the scenes is what's truly interesting. We have to go through this process of validating hardware, drivers, and then, just as you're about to deploy, oh, I need a new boot image. All right, okay, that's got to go out too. Long processes where a lot of our time is spent in the integration world, trying to get that to the end user, get it to the final stage where a user can make use of it. So the value is being spent behind the scenes. The user doesn't get to see that value. What we are trying to do with Microsoft is to turn that upside down, reduce how much we're doing of the integration, and add value to the user's experience. Put our time and effort and energy into that part of the equation, because that's where the most important part of it is. When we started going down this path and we said, okay, how do we take a box directly from the factory floor and go over and give it directly to the user, have them unbox it, couple of steps to log in, and they're productive within 7 to 10 minutes. We partnered with Microsoft and said, we really need to find a way to make this happen. And of course, they were up to the challenge. And in great Microsoft spirit, we started working together and starting to build out this flow and test it out and integrate it. The true story here is that we're taking all of this custom stuff that we historically did, and we're moving it on over into commodity. We're making these services a commodity, which is very important in today's world. We can't spend hours of time and labor and integration trying to get to that last piece where, we get chucked a product, hey, it's announced. We now have to do all this integration and get it into the bank, get it to the users, make it live and make it work. We can now say that we'll go directly to our vendor, Lenovo's example, or Dell, make an order from our internal system where we use something called ServiceNow. It's labeled as My Marketplace. The user can go on, say, hey, I want this device. It gets shipped to them, and they can, through a few clicks, be ready to go and productive. And they are connected to the domain. They have their productivity, and they can start being productive immediately. Now that is a delighter. That is how we are taking value and driving it directly to the end user. And let me not, fool you. This was a lot of hard work on both Microsoft's side and our side. And we really have to commend them for the work they did here. Tanvir can come up and tell you all about, these very late nights he spent with a bunch of developers and me at the offices at RBC. 4 in the morning, the room's getting fresh, and we're still there because we have, a briefing the following morning. But they stuck it out. They stuck it out with us, and they worked with us to get to that last step, to get to that delivery to our users. And that is the real value. When we think about onboarding users, the current process is very long in the tooth. You have to hire a user, accounts, have a machine provisioned, it gets ordered from the factory to a third party that lays down images that we've spent hundreds and thousands of hours engineering. Then, whether it's done right or not, it comes back in, it gets unboxed again, and then it gets to the user, and a lot of times it's still wrong. There's no value there. We're not putting value into our users' hands. The value is that you take all of that entire stream and you just get rid of it. You stop being in the business of all of this customization. When I hire somebody now, or when the bank hires, I don't get to hire anybody. Way above my pay grade. But the point being is when we do hire a new person to join the organization, we can have them go onto an intranet site that they would have access to, go through the list of supported vendors that we have and all the different models of hardware, select something they want, and have it shipped out. Now remember, they haven't arrived at the bank yet to start their first day of work. The machine shows up at their house, they get, this brand new, sealed, nicely wrapped machine in a nice new, box, and they get to unbox it and, as Tanvir said, get that new computer smell. They get to turn it on. They get to simply go through 2-3 steps. The machine is up and running. It's connected to our network. Email is running. Skype is running. And behind the scenes, we continue to push more apps down. But we're not holding the user hostage. We have made them productive. In all the tests we did, we were in a 7 to 10 minute flow from the moment the user hit Ubi and connected to a network to when they were on their desktop, domain joined. Now that is value. That is truly driving the customer experience. And that is, as our jobs as technologists within the various organizations, that is our jobs, is to take it and improve the customer's experience and to reduce a lot of that bottleneck. What's great and why our HR teams absolutely love us is when that user shows up to work for the first time, there isn't a 3-week twiddling my thumbs. They've been able to complete their compliance courses. They've been able to, navigate our ServiceNow and know how to order additional memberships within groups. They have done a lot of that. So day one, they come in and they're driving value for the organization. They're productive. And that is truly what this is all about. To change the way and the experiences we offer our consumers and our customers. Everything going forward from what we do between the work we did with Microsoft, we had other vendors involved that we use. Our primary goal and our end goal was to start improving the experiences that users have when they join the organization. It's not a great thing that when they come in and they have to go through a week or 2 or 3 of trying to get a machine, get it set up. It's just not fun. And, my role as an engineer previously before I started into architecture was building those images. And that wasn't fun either. We're taking something that is perfectly integrated by the OEM and we're blowing it away. It made sense in the past, but it doesn't anymore. And thanks to Microsoft and a lot of these new experiences that they're helping drive, we're able to take that value and return it to the customer, return it to the user, and to delight the users. And this is the path on which we are heading. Really looking forward to it. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I'll let Tanvir come up here and talk a little bit more about, all the pain I put in him and his team through. I really hope that the next feature he's going to bring up here is how to get from Windows 7 to 10. It would be really good if I could simply take the long pole in the tent and, the user's data, get it out into OneDrive while I'm doing this migration, so I'm not going to a CIFS share and then back again onto the machine. If I could get that data into OneDrive, I could start saving NAS space. I could start dealing with getting data secured. I don't have to worry about hard drives crashing. So I really hope that he's going to come up here and talk a little bit about that. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But thank you very much for your time. I appreciate everyone's time to let me come up here and speak to you a little bit about our partnership. And we look forward to doing a lot more wonderful things with Microsoft and speaking to you again in the future of all our successes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hasnain. So, to recap, Autopilot now supports joining to on-prem AD starting in 1809. You get the same benefits that you're used to with user-driven mode today, including things like being able to select whether the first user will be an admin or a standard user, being able to skip the various UBI pages to get to that streamlined experience, and also new functionality that we're bringing up, like the device naming capabilities from yesterday. There's no additional licensing needed from user-driven mode. And in a nutshell, you'll be able to join a new machine using Autopilot, join it into Active Directory, land on the desktop in just 5 to 9 minutes. So that is the first scenario I wanted to talk about today. No applause. Okay. The second scenario I wanted to talk about today is what we call self-deploying mode. Now, to really understand what self-deploying mode is, we need to first talk about, how would you use Autopilot to deploy any one of these scenarios? So you have things like digital signage. So imagine you have a flight status board at an airport, or the check-in counter for a single app kiosk, or even for education customers. Imagine if you have a cart of devices where students are expected to pick up a device and log in for the first time and start using that machine. If you think about user-driven mode today, it really doesn't fit quite right with either of those scenarios, because it involves a user actually using the device with a keyboard and mouse, authenticating into that machine, and, well, that's not really how any of these devices are actually set up. Maybe you can get away with that, but there's probably a better way. So when we came back to the team and thought about this problem and how do we cater to these types of scenarios, we really came up with these sort of high-level design notes. We came to the realization that it's usually technicians that set up these types of devices. There's typically no user to authenticate or sign up or set up the device. It's usually just a team that comes in and unboxes and maybe plugs in the power, and that's about it. You may or may not have the luxury of having peripherals. So keyboard and mouse, when was the last time you saw a keyboard and mouse on your flight status board? It's not really there. And they typically involve walk-up and use scenarios. So a student isn't really going to walk up, go through Autopilot just so they can use their device and take a test or something along those lines. And we also thought about, again, going back to our Autopilot principles. It should be really as easy as registering your device, assigning a self-deploying profile using Intune, and then connecting to a network and just booting the machine. So we went ahead and built that. And so instead of going through all the nuts and bolts, I'd actually just like to show this to you now. And to do that, I have a Surface Go here. And I will attempt to do a live demo, which is going to work for sure. So I've been advised to use the demo Wi-Fi because too many of you are tweeting about everything I'm doing. Okay. So when I connect to this network, I want to point out just one or two more things before I hit next. What you saw here is me having to actually connect to the Wi-Fi. And that's because this Surface Go laptop isn't connected already to internet. If this were connected via Ethernet to an internet connection, I wouldn't have had to do anything. The machine would have booted, and it would have, the next screen you would have seen is what you see when I hit next. It's only in those scenarios where I don't already have Ethernet or I don't already have network at boot where you'll have to interact with this machine at all. Just watch what happens when I hit next. So the first thing you'll see is the device, once it's connected to the internet, as any other Autopilot machine, starting in 1703 with the July update, it's going to reach out to our Autopilot service, and it's going to send up its hardware hash. The Autopilot service will recognize this device and send down, in this case, a self-deploying profile. And in that profile, Mike Niehaus has included a device rename, and so we will see this machine go down, just like we did yesterday, and it's applying the device rename. When the machine comes back up, which it's going to take its time since I'm up on stage, what you will see is the experience you should expect if a machine is connected to the Ethernet and is booted for the first time. So what you're about to see from here going forward is identical to what you'd expect if you booted this machine for the first time and it's connected via Ethernet. Oops. So you'll see company branding. You'll see welcome, let's get you set up for work, and no buttons. And in about 5 to 10 seconds, you'll get automatically transitioned over to the enrollment status page. And on this enrollment status page, you'll see, I will interact with this just to show you what's happening, but you'll see what's happening is 3 different steps: device preparation, device setup, and account setup. Now, in device preparation, typically what that section tracks is the state of the device as it's joining to Azure Active Directory. In this case, because there's not necessarily a user present or able to authenticate into this machine, we've invented a new mechanism for your device to silently and automatically enroll against AAD using the secure hardware that's on the device. So this first step, you saw that it automatically completed and is showing that it's AAD joined, even though I didn't interact with this device or provide any credentials to this device. And if you're wondering, there was no credentials specified in the Autopilot profile either. Next, it waited for all of the Intune configurations to come down to the device and set up this machine to be a kiosk. I actually don't know what it's set up to be, so let's find out what it's going to deploy. So while this is taking its time and saying that it's going to take several minutes, I'm going to go back very quickly to the original deck, and here I have a pre-made video. And in this video, I'll show you a slightly sped up version. But you'll see that once you get past these first couple of this step, this particular machine in the video was set up so that it automatically launches in kiosk mode. So it's launching into, directly really, the kiosk web browser, the new app we've released recently to allow you to enable some of these kiosk type scenarios. So imagine now you can have a device that you turn on for the first time, connect to the internet via Ethernet or with a few simple clicks to Wi-Fi, and it just deploys itself. And you're just on your way, you're good to go for the next device and the next device. Self-deploying mode doesn't have any additional licensing requirements from user-driven mode. In fact, you'll probably hear me saying that for all of our scenarios. The main difference with self-deploying mode is really this piece here that I've highlighted. It requires TPM 2.0. And the reason it requires TPM 2.0 is the reason I mentioned earlier, which is, well, we've invented a new way for the device to authenticate on your behalf. So it needs something secure to be able to authenticate into Azure with. And that's the TPM 2.0 chip. While we've been talking, this Surface Go has deployed. Looks like Mike has set up for us the flight status of maybe some airport. And so if you're on one of these flights, it looks like they're on time. If any of you have been keeping time, I think that was under 5 minutes. So I mean, that's cool, right? All right. So to recap this slide real quick, self-deploying mode, same licensing requirements as user-driven mode, no additional licensing needed. It requires a TPM 2.0 chip, and that's because we're authenticating on your behalf using that TPM 2.0 chip. If you don't have TPM 2.0, what will happen is the device will show up on the enrollment status page, and you'll see an error on that first step because it won't be able to join AAD without user credentials. I'd like to switch over really quickly to whatever device this one is, and show you the Intune console and just show what the experience is for setting up a profile to do this scenario. You're probably thinking it's very complicated because it involves all of this device auth and all of that, but it's actually pretty straightforward. So over in Intune, I've just launched the Intune Blade. I'll go into device enrollment. And under device enrollment, I will select Windows enrollment. Now, Windows enrollment looks like this. And what we will do is we'll go into deployment profiles. And for us here, I'll go into create profile. And what you'll see is you'll see this blade come up, which you've typically used to go ahead and create autopilot profiles up till now. Well, we'll call this kiosk devices demo. We'll select deployment mode, and you'll see there's a drop down here for self-deploying. So we'll select self-deploying mode, and you can configure the out-of-box experience. Now, one other thing to point out here is when you're doing user-driven mode, typically the couple of pages you have to do in the beginning are language, region, keyboard, followed by some internet connectivity, then followed by authentication. Well, if we're automating all of that, if you're connected at boot, that means we'll have to pre-select the language and the region for you. So when you go to create this autopilot profile, you'll see that some new options that show up specifically for self-deploying mode is the language. So you'll be able to pre-select the language and the keyboard. So when you go through self-deploying mode, these will already be set for you on the user's behalf. And of course, the same device naming templates and all of the other goodness that you get with user-driven mode is applicable for self-deploying mode. That's really all it takes to set up self-deploying mode. Can you imagine? Just hit save, wait for the profile to assign, and boot your machine, and it'll deploy itself. 0 touches. I don't know how many of you remember, I think Sid was here last year. He's in the front row here. But he mentioned that he's trying to get to a 0-click experience and that we hate clicks. Well, this is proof that we don't like clicks. If you'd like to learn more about how to use this scenario in some of those shared devices or kiosks or those types of things, I encourage you to check out tomorrow's session at 2:15, presented by Ariel and Kelly. And they'll talk about shared devices for kiosk and first-line workers. There's a lot of other goodness that the team has come up with beyond just this autopilot flow. So I encourage you to check this out. Oops. So to recap, Autopilot now supports truly zero-touch deployment. It's ideal for userless scenarios or shared devices. And there's no additional licensing needed from user-driven mode, but it does require a TPM 2.0. And that is the second scenario I wanted to talk about today. Now, the third scenario I wanted to highlight today involves old things, believe it or not. It involves existing devices. You know, it's kind of weird having to come here and talk about autopilot because one of the first things that we talk about is, well, when you purchase your new device, well, a lot of customers I've talked to this year, turns out they don't have the budget to purchase new devices for everyone. It's surprising. But you have all these existing machines, and we have to figure out a way to make those usable for autopilot too. So we worked hard this past year since this last Ignite, and we have quite a bit to show you on some improvements we've made in this area. The first is something we've had since last year, but because we're talking about existing devices, I'd like to touch on it really quickly. If you have existing devices in your estate, you'll be able to register them using the PowerShell script Mike Niehaus has published for you. When you run this script, it generates what's known as a hardware hash in the form of a CSV. And you can take that CSV and upload it to any one of the portals that we mentioned yesterday, but we specifically encouraged you to use the Intune portal if you're focused more on enterprise. This is ideal for testing and validation with existing machines in your estate, and it's something you can do as soon as you go back from Ignite. One other piece of functionality that we were particularly happy about was the announcement around being able to automatically register devices into Autopilot that are Intune enrolled. So if you have existing Windows 10 devices, all you have to do now is enroll them into Intune. If they're already enrolled, great. Flip this switch in Intune and all of your devices will automatically get registered into Autopilot like that. If they're not already Intune enrolled, there's a simple switch either through co-management, through config manager, or through a group policy that'll get your device enrolled into Intune, which will then automatically register these devices into Autopilot. Yeah. Our team really feels like these two are very powerful tools, especially this auto-enrollment through Intune, to help you get a lot of that existing estate into a flow that supports Autopilot. And while this is all fun to talk about, I think the elephant in the room is really this date here. Anyone in this room have any idea what the significance of that date is? So I heard it's about this thing, Windows 7. It's before my time. And the problem a lot of us in the industry are facing is how do you get this machine running whatever this is to Windows 10? And our role in the Autopilot team is to really figure out how Autopilot plays a role in all of this. So I'm happy to announce today that we have support for existing devices for Windows 7 as you migrate to Windows 10. And this is largely possible through our partnerships with just others in the organization. So excellent work from OneDrive for Business, from Intune, from System Center, and I'll touch upon how all of these services come together to make that migration from Windows 7 to Windows 10 as seamless as possible with the best user experience possible. One common trend, just touching on that for a second as an aside, what we've seen is a lot of folks in the industry kind of shift away from, hey, how do I do X, Y, and Z, to what's the best way end users will feel about me trying to do X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of focus on end user experience, which is why you'll see across this flow and all of our other scenarios that we really focus on what the end user actually sees to ensure that they have a seamless experience and one that they'll actually appreciate. Okay, going back. So design notes for this. Well, Windows 7 end of support is fast approaching. Usually, when you're doing this type of migration, you'd also like to migrate user data from Windows 7 to Windows 10. So something to keep in mind. Good. Autopilot currently only supports on version 1703 with the July update and later. Doesn't really help you if you're running Windows 7. It's way before 1703. And the other problem, really the biggest problem here that prevents you from using Autopilot today on Windows 7 is you're unable to harvest hardware hashes in Windows 7. This isn't just something that we can provide a tool for you where you can generate hardware hashes. Hardware hashes that Autopilot uses are a very complex ID effectively based on the hardware and software and all this other goodness. But it's just not possible to do this on Windows 7. We've tried. We've tried a lot. But we do have a solution for you. And obviously, as with all of our other scenarios, it really should be as easy as 1, 2, 3. In this case, we have a step 0. I'll cheat a little bit. Where optionally, you can also deploy a group policy first to redirect known folders to OneDrive. That'll help take care of your data problem. You generate what's known as an Autopilot configuration file, which I'll go over what that is and how to author one and how to use one in just a few minutes. You deploy a task sequence to upgrade to Windows 10, and as your Windows 10 machine goes through its first boot ever, it'll immediately go through Autopilot. So you'll get that same user experience, and it'll have the same capabilities as user-driven mode today. One thing I'd like to point out is, although a lot of this is focused around OneDrive, it is focused around SCCM and Intune and all the tight integration that's done there, you'll see in the documentation that it's not necessarily bound to those specific technologies. You're able to use your own agent, you're able to use your own mechanism of migrating data. So I'd like you to still consider Autopilot for existing devices, even if you don't necessarily use these specific tools. To show you an upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10 using this new Autopilot flow, I'd like to invite someone who you may be familiar with, Michael Niehaus, to the stage.
All right, let's show you what we've done. And the easiest way is just, let's start out with a demo. For those of you who were in the previous session with the OneDrive team, you might have already seen me go through some of this, but we'll show it here with a condensed version so that we can see the whole process without me having to go on and off stage multiple times as the process is progressing. But the basic idea is simple. We have a Windows 7 device. that Windows 7 device has data, has files, has your stuff on it. And we want to make sure that ends up on the new machine. But we don't want to have to migrate it as part of the typical config manager task sequence. So we're going to kick off a config manager task sequence, but we're not going to do any data migration at all because we've already used OneDrive for Business and the known folder move to make sure that everything in my documents, pictures, and all the other major known folders gets pushed to the cloud. Since we know that it's in the cloud, we can make sure then that we just configure Intune to push down the OneDrive settings to make OneDrive automatically configure itself to pull the data back. So we start off the task sequence. It does no data migration. It stages a Windows PE boot image on the system and reboots into Windows PE. At that point, we'll completely wipe the machine. So reformat the hard drive, lay down a Windows 10 image, and boot it up into the normal out-of-box experience. Now, as Tanvir mentioned, typically you would need to pre-register the device with Autopilot in order to get the Autopilot user experience. But in this case, we couldn't easily do that. It would be really painful to go through that process. So as an alternative, you might have seen very quickly the step that copied a configuration file onto the operating system. It's a simple text file, formatted JSON, that says here is the settings that Autopilot should use. So when the machine boots up for the first time, we go through the normal keyboard, locale, network connection stuff, and after that, it reads that configuration file. The configuration file says what Azure AD tenant we need to join. So we get the customized branded logon page. We put in our ID and password. That completes the process of joining the machine to Azure Active Directory, enrolling it in Intune, and then Intune can push the configuration down. We display the enrollment status page during that process. We'll then sign on as the user and finish the user configuration. And then if everything works, we end up on the desktop where you can go back into File Explorer and immediately see your files. Because we've automatically configured OneDrive, we've set up the known folder migration process, all the placeholders are already synced down to the machine, and you can access your data. Now, in a real world scenario, this would take at least 20 minutes because you need to download an image, apply it, boot for the first time, and do that configuration. But you can see even already it's popping up to say, hey, we're syncing your data, and it's going to be there ready before you even get to the desktop. Okay. So now we're on the desktop. We can see our applications are installed, including Office and a few other apps. If we open up File Explorer, we can look at pictures, documents, and see that everything is there and ready to go. Very nice, very easy, leveraging some work that we actually started on with the OneDrive team well over a year ago. So if you remember last year at Ignite, we showed how to do this. Now it's built into the product. They've added it to OneDrive. They've made it that simple. So you can go back to the OneDrive for Business session that was in the previous time slot. Watch the video for that if you weren't in that session to learn more about what OneDrive has done. But now we want to dig in a little bit more on how this actually works. So let me switch over to a virtual machine where we can see a configuration manager environment. And hopefully I still have a network connection here. Or not. Let me reconnect here. Give it a sec, it'll come back. So while that's working, hopefully it'll reconnect here shortly, I'll show you one other piece, which is the JSON file. Now, the JSON file that we're talking about here is a configuration file which needs to be generated. So the easiest way of doing that is via PowerShell. So we published a PowerShell script, which I can load here. Let me zoom in on that so you can actually see it. It's a few levels deep here. So we can load a module and then connect to Intune using the Intune Graph API. So we need to specify credentials for doing that. Once we have authenticated, we can then query for a list of Autopilot profiles defined in Intune. So we can see the details there. You can see I've got 2 different profiles available. And then I can convert those into JSON. Except now I can't see the bottom of my window. So let me scroll down a little bit here. So we can see the output on the screen showing the JSON equivalent of those profiles. So all I need to do then is copy and paste that into a text file. With that text file, I can just drop that into the Windows folder as part of the task sequence to make the whole process flow. So let me switch back over to my VM now that it's reconnected. Oops. Helps to be able to type. And let's look a little bit at the task sequence. So I can go to task sequences, find the task sequence that we just ran, and look at the details. If you've looked at a typical task sequence in Config Manager, it would probably be considerably bigger than this. In this case, all the task sequence needs to do is reboot to Windows PE, reformat the disk, depending on whether it's a BIOS or UEFI system, install the operating system, copy the JSON file into the right place, which we do with the simple PowerShell script, inject any device drivers needed for the specific hardware that you're running this on, get rid of the unattend.xml that Config Manager normally puts in to automate the UBI process because we want it to be done by Autopilot, and then we reboot. So the restart then goes into the standard Windows out-of-box experience, which gets customized by the JSON file so that the process works. Now, if we look at this particular JSON file, which is called autopilot configuration file.json, you can see in there the name of my tenant and all of the other Autopilot details. There's also a GUID listed in here, a ZTD correlation ID, which gets reported up through Intune and ends up assigned to the Intune objects that are present that have gone through and used this configuration file, which makes it useful to group those machines later if you want to as well. So some convenient ways of doing additional configuration that way. But the rest of it then is standard Autopilot, where you have used the Intune console, the Intune capabilities to push down applications, to push down settings, to push configuration to the device. If you want to do co-management, one of those things would be the Config Manager client, pushing that down to the device, getting the device re-enrolled in Config Manager as well, so that you can then do the co-management approach. So that's it. Let's turn it back over to Tanvir.
Thanks, Mike. Oh. Thanks, Mike. My mic doesn't work. All right. Okay. So you can see there how you can use Autopilot for existing devices to make your 7 to 10 migration more seamless and still take advantage of the same user-driven experiences that you can see. I know it sounds like we're about to end, but there's actually some new things that I'll still talk about from now until the end. So Autopilot, to recap this, still supports, or now supports, all existing machines. You get the benefits, again, of the same Autopilot configurations as user-driven mode today. Again, there's no additional licensing needed from user-driven mode. And you can use this to ease your Windows 10 deployment, whether you're starting from Windows 7, starting on a VM, really just any version of Windows starting from Windows 7. And one more thing, when we talked about this scenario, we didn't really give a time frame. It really depends on the hardware, but in this particular case, when Mike and I recorded this last Friday, it took like 20, 25 minutes. And that is the third new scenario coming out in 1809 that I wanted to talk about today. So today, we talked about self-deploying mode, hybrid Azure AD join, and Autopilot for existing devices. And the 3 of these scenarios from this talk join the rest of the scenarios covered yesterday and exist previously to come up with our key scenarios for Autopilot in the 1809 release. One thing I'd like to point out is that this was just our first year. We really just announced this last Ignite, and already I can fill up this page with all the features that our team has scrambled to put together for you guys. And if you think that's just our first year, we have a lot of things coming for you. I'd like to highlight on that last comment there, the things coming for you. And I'd like to highlight some of the items on our roadmap. And today, again, sticking with the 3 theme, I'd like to highlight and give you a sneak peek into 3 scenarios that we're thinking about, or 3 features that we're thinking of for Autopilot in the upcoming 6 months. Well, really in the 6 months, but it could be up to the year. What I'd like you to think about is really that a lot of these can change from what I show today and what we release. But it's really to give you some thinking into how we operate and the types of problems that we'd like to tackle and approach. So for this first one, I'll apologize in behalf. I'll apologize before I go to this slide because I have to show you this.
Hi there, I'm Cortana, and I'm here to help.
So how many of you have deployed a machine, a vanilla Windows 10 machine, in the last 30 days? I have. Well, one of the things is you get Cortana, and don't get me wrong, she's super friendly and super helpful, but when you're deploying devices all the time, you hear her a lot. And the thing is, I tried to be nice, and I only showed you the first 2 sentences she says. She really does a whole 30-second intro in the beginning. And when you're like me and you're deploying dozens of these machines at a given time or just all the time, it really just sounds something like this.
Hi there, and I'm here to help.
And what's funny about this is that Cortana, and she's so nice, she's trying to help you. When it gets to the region page or the keyboard page, she starts listening to other Cortana instances and starts selecting your language for you, trying to be helpful. And so then you get to a laptop and you're like, why is it preset to Zimbabwe? One other funny thing about this, we've seen customers, specifically in EDU lately, where to kind of solve this problem, because they're ones to tend to kind of set up devices in bulk and run into this problem, what they've done is they've actually bought like $5 headsets, snipped off, and so you just have the headphone jack, and plugged it in, right? So in one way, when I tell you about what we're working on, something to consider is that I'm saving you yet another $5 on your deployment. Because hopefully, starting in the next release, Cortana will be turned off and gone by default, starting on all SKUs except home. Talk about lowering that TCO. The next item that I'd like to touch on briefly is around the enrollment status page. For this one, today, if you've already played around with the settings in Intune, you'll notice that it's only configurable to your entire tenant. It's an all or nothing. Also, when it's enabled, it tracks all Intune configurations on the enrollment status page. So whether it's a required application or not, it's going to be tracked, and the user will have to sit through the download and the installation of those applications and those security policies and those certificates and the networking profiles, and that takes time. So what we'd like to do in the next couple of months is to make it so, one, you can target the page to specific groups, and two, once enabled, you can start to select exactly what's tracked and start selecting which Intune configurations you'd like to have tracked on that page, as well as opening it up so that other configurations from other sources can also be tracked on the enrollment status page. So that's the second item I'd like to give you a sneak peek on. The third one really has to deal with this question here. When we go to customers, oftentimes we'll get a response back that we're not really expecting, and they say, for whatever reason, they can't do their pilot or their POC on Autopilot, and we always ask, what is the biggest challenge to adopting Autopilot today for you? What do you think the number one answer is? I heard applications. And the answer is applications. The thing we hear most is customers don't want a user to have to boot into a machine for the first time and then immediately be stuck in Ubi while your machine is downloading gigs and gigs of data in the background. It takes time. If you don't have a fast network, it's going to take a really long time. And you might not just have the bandwidth, depending on where you are. And so today, I'd like to give you a sneak peek into something that we like to call white glove. So again, white glove is not an official final name, which is why it's in quotes. But I'd like to give you an idea of what we're looking at, what we're thinking of, so you can get an idea of where it is that our team focuses on and what types of challenges we'd like to tackle next. To really understand what it is we're trying to do with white glove, consider some factory somewhere where your machines are being manufactured. So at some warehouse, Woodgrove, devices are being processed. So typically how this goes is you put in an order, OEM manufactures the machine, and then they ship it out to you. Well, imagine before they shipped it out to you if they processed it just a little bit more. And we're trying to come up with an experience where the OEM on your behalf would be able to go through an autopilot flow right there on the manufacturing line, so that when your device is shipped out to you, all of your applications are not only already on the machine, but they're installed and ready to go. And it's not really identical to an IT admin doing this in the back of the house, because when an end user boots that machine for the first time, they're going through each of the autopilot experiences we've talked about in the past. So they'll still get the prompts to authenticate, they'll still get the enrollment status page, and they'll still get some amount of last mile configurations. But a bulk of that has already been done for you. And on the manufacturing floor, when all is said and done, they'll see something close to this. And if you think that's an Easter egg, it just loads up Microsoft.com. But you'll get a screen like this where a technician will just scan this page to indicate that the machine has finished provisioning. They will read the data on this machine, or on this page, to know that it's belonging to this organization, possibly this batch, what deployment type it was, how long it took them. And the button on the bottom right is not one that an end user will necessarily ever see, but for the person setting up this machine for you, doing the white glove experience, they'll be able to just reseal the device with a click of a button, put the machine back, and ship it out. So when an end user boots the machine for the first time, it doesn't have to download the 50 gigabytes of data or applications or anything along those lines. Everything's already on there. So you just sign on and go. Now there's a lot we've covered in part 1 and part 2. And while we'll equip you with all the up-to-date documentation and make ourselves available to you to reach out to and ask questions, and I'll throw up that information up in a bit, what I'd also like to do very quickly is talk about Fast Track. So Fast Track is a service that that Microsoft provides, which helps you adopt Microsoft 365 services faster. And today, what I'm happy to announce is that Autopilot will be joining the rest of the scenarios that Fast Track supports. So I take it, before I even tell you when, you're excited? Almost. We're expecting them to light up support at the end of October, but it could be up until the end of this year, but very soon. So you'll be able to leverage Fast Track resources to help you with your Autopilot deployment. And with that, my name is Tanvir Ahmed. Thank you for joining us for Autopilot Part 2.